Welcome back everyone to another wonderful Salty Productions video. Today we are tier listing all of the best mono green flyers within the Commander format. That's right, I assembled simply all of the green flyers. We have a total of 42 cards to evaluate today. Now this will probably go pretty quick because a lot of these are very scuffed. In fact, on our tier list we don't even have a B category because we just simply don't have a lot of mid-power mono green flyers. It's either somewhat playable, S tier, or basically you just don't want to play it. And so we've got our tiers here. So we've got S, slam it into any deck, or rather most decks, I suppose. So this would be your absolute all-stars, something that you'd be happy to draw within your hand and go into most green decks. A would mean you can actually play with a straight face, so it's probably a little bit scuffed given it is a mono green flyer, but you could play it and not be laughed at your table for playing such a card. And we have our C category for simply cut it, and then we have our poop category, which means this card is actively bad and has no redeeming qualities. Before we get into the cards, I'd just like to ask if you enjoy this video, leave a like on it and subscribe to see more awesome tier lists like these. Always happy to bring them to you. Which brings us to our comment of the week. Back on my last tier listing video, we evaluated mono blue land ramp options, and Satchel, or Sachil, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, says, nice list, generally agree with placements, and this is a useful resource, additional options not mentioned. And then he goes through about a dozen or so options that I did not mention for mono blue landfall, but some callouts from this list that I can't believe I did not actually find in my searching is replication technique allows you to get possibly up to 2 copies of target permanent that you control if you allow your opponent to also get a copy of a permanent they control. And also Sword of Forge and Frontier is another good card that you could play with a straight face, generating ramp and card draw at the same time. All right, with that out of the way, we will head into our tier listing here. And real quick, I do have all of the cards supersized on my left monitor over here, so if you see me looking left a lot, that is why. Starting us off here, we have Birds of Paradise, arguably the most popular green flyer ever played in the game of Magic the Gathering, regardless of format. It is simply a 1-mana mana orc that taps to add 1 mana of any color, and this simply goes into the S tier for the rich history that is contained within Birds of Paradise. Absolutely amazing card, can go in any green deck. Then we have Gilded Goose, 0/2 flyer. When ETBs create a food token, and we can pay 2 tap to create a food token, so a little bit of a mana storage mechanic there. And then we can tap and sacrifice a food to add 1 mana of any color. I think this is a clear A category because you probably would play Gilded Goose in some sort of food deck or some sort of artifact-based deck where you care about sacrificing foods. Perhaps an Igor Eater of All deck would want this, or any of the Sam Loyal Attendant partnering with Frodo decks would want this as well, and it will net you a 1 mana for only 1 mana investment. So just a great card overall. That is Gilded Goose. Next we have Scryb Sprites, a 1 mana 1/1 fairy flyer, and this has absolutely no text other than that. It is simply a 1/1 for 1 in Commander. I think that this is a clear bottom of C perhaps. The only reason you might not find it in poop tier is because it's a fairy, I guess, and might fit into fairy tribal decks, but honestly it does not work against you, and so that's why we are not putting it quite into poop territory, but definitely bottom of C to get a 1/1 flyer. Perhaps, I guess you could play Toski. That would be like the only other place that I could think of where you would want this to possibly draw some cards as a flyer, but pretty mid at that. Then we move to Uktabi Drake. This is a 1 mana 2/1 flying with haste. Oh boy, we can get in for 2 damage the turn we play this, folks. But it has Echo for 3 at the beginning of your upkeep. If this came under your control since the beginning of your last upkeep, sack it unless you pay its Echo cost, which is typically more seen in like graveyard decks where you want to be putting this into the graveyard for use later, whether you want to activate Delirium or Dredge with it or any sort of reanimation effects, of course. But this is going to never be on your radar for reanimation categories, or options, I should say, and this clearly goes into the cut category for letter C. Next on our list, we have Xantid Swarm, which is an interesting little card. 1 mana 0/1 creature insect with flying. Whenever Xantid Swarm attacks, defending player can't cast spells this turn. Now, this is not a garbage effect in Commander. We do like turning off our opponents being able to cast spells, However, I just don't know if this is worth a card slot because you would have to anticipate that they would use a spell on your turn. So like maybe if you're playing against a lot of draw go control-y type of decks that are going to be interacting on your turn, especially if that control deck is to your left, meaning that they're going to be doing their turn on your end step. I think this is an interesting effect in that meta. Maybe it's playable with an Insect Tribal. I know that Insect Tribal has gotten a few good additions within the last few years, Grist and so forth. I just don't know if you would ever play this in a generic commander deck, and you would really need to build around it in a meta that really cares about casting at instant speed. So I think Xantid Swarm will probably go bottom of A or top of C, really because we are just giving respect to those insect tribal decks out there, if anything. Next on our list, Bayou Dragonfly, 2-mana 1/1 with flying and swamp walk. So if you are afraid that your 1/1 flyer won't get through, you can send it at the black player playing swamps. This is absolutely garbage bottom of C. I would never pay 2 mana for what is essentially an unblockable 1/1 flyer, although it is an insect, and I think though just because it does cost 2 mana, it still goes at the bottom of C below everything else we've seen so far. Next up, we have Emerald Dragonfly, 2-mana 1/1 Dragonfly creature. It has flying, and you can pay 2 to give it first strike until end of turn, and this will find a nice home right in the middle of C because we do not want to be playing 2 mana for 1/1 flying first strikers, not where we want to be. Next, we have Moon Sprite, 2-mana 1/1 flyer. The only redeeming quality of this card, I think, is the art. Honestly, that is a pretty sick art, and I think the reds and the patterning of the wings really does capture the eye. So in this midst of all of these cuttable cards, I will make tiebreakers based on art and beauty, and I think that Moon Sprite does look pretty sick. So we're gonna put it below our first strike friend and above the Dragonfly. Next up, we have Scryb Ranger, 2-mana 1/1 Faerie with flash, flying, and protection from blue. Return a force you control to its owner's hand. Untap target creature. Activate this ability only once each turn. So this has the biggest safety valves on it by only being able to do that once per turn, which means you cannot combo with it. But nonetheless, I think that out of all of the 2-drops we've seen, this probably has the most amount of utility. Untapping and tapping creatures can be very powerful in Commander, and if you even consider that at base case you'd be untapping a mana dork, I think that this does sort of kind of net you a mana and gives you a forest to play if you care about landfall synergies. So honestly, in a fairy deck, if you're in a fairy deck that cared about landfall triggers or tapping and untapping, you could maybe see playing this. And with flash, it has pseudo haste, but again, what are we going to be doing with a 1/1 flyer that is protection from blue? So I think we go top of C with Scryb Ranger. Next on our list, we have quite the modal card here with Skin Shifter, 2-mana 1/1 creature human shaman. You can pay 1 to have it to become a 4/4 rhino and gain trample, a 2/2 bird with flying, or a 0/8 plant in case you wanted to block those chunky 7/7 beefy boys. And you can only activate this once each turn. This is not good. It needs an activation in order to gain flying, which is why it technically makes the list. But the question becomes, would you ever play this for any of the creature types other than the 2/2 bird? Because we know that what is essentially a 3-mana 2/2 flyer with no other abilities is probably pretty garbage in Commander. So this could be a nice wall for your opponents. Still obviously cuttable. I don't think this would ever make it out of C category, but I think it's probably towards the top of C, to be honest. It does have some redeeming qualities to become a 4/4 or a 0/8. So I think we'll put it below our Scryb Ranger within the C category. Next up, we have Uktabi Faerie, 2-mana 1/1 Faerie. It has flying, and you can pay 4 to sack it and destroy target artifact. So once again, little bit of utility there in Commander, but you are paying 6 mana to destroy target artifact. That's obviously garbage. So we're going to keep it in the C category, and I think we'll put it perhaps under our Skin Shifter, or maybe above, actually. I actually do like the ability to destroy artifacts. That's more useful than becoming a 4/4 or 0/8. So I think points there, and maybe even we go above a Scryb Ranger, I think, because that has more utility than being able to untap one creature. I still think you get made fun of if you played this at an average table, so it doesn't make it out of C, but not quite in poop territory, because it does have a redeeming quality while being able to destroy artifacts. So that's Uktabi Faerie. Next up, we have another fairy. This is Willow Faerie, 2 mana 1/2 fairy creature with flying. And this art, honestly, is kind of a tiebreaker. I really like the setup of this art. The deer's just sort of chilling with this fairy sitting on it. So that's pretty cool. But it's just a vanilla creature. So honestly, for 2 mana, just a generic 1/2 flyer, I think it has to go above our 1/1 flyer, but below our first strike flyer there. So C category for Willow Faerie. Next up, we have Caustic Wasps, 3 mana 1/1 creature inside with flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may destroy target artifact that player controls. This is actually a decently playable option. I do like the fact that if an opponent does not have any flying defenders or reach defenders, then you can just start picking apart their board. And as we all know, artifacts are super common in Commander. So I think that this actually is probably in either bottom of S or top of A. I don't think maybe it would be an S, just because I think that's really reserved for like meta Commander decks. But I think this definitely goes top of A, maybe even above Gilded Goose, to be honest. No, we'll put it one below Gilded Goose, because mana is always super important, and Caustic Wasp does take a little bit to get going. But I think that honestly, like, I would play this in a very creature heavy deck if I wasn't interested in like a Reclamation Sage or anything with an ETB, destroy target artifact or enchantment. I'd maybe look at Caustic Wasps. Also, if you care about combat damage triggers, like we got the recent Felix 5 Boots, which doubles up your combat damage triggers, so there might be some synergy there. But top of A for Caustic Wasps. Next up, we have yet another fairy, 3 mana 1/2 for Faerie Noble. It has flying. Other fairy creatures you control get +0/+1. We couldn't add an extra power onto that, folks. That would be way too powerful. And you can tap it to give other fairies creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. So it's a lord that you have to basically keep this tap down 100% of the time. My goodness, is that awful. In Faerie Tribal, you probably wouldn't even play this, but that would be the only home where it would be. But I suppose in a fairy deck, you could maybe stack it with like untap and tap synergy. So maybe there's some synergy with her Scryb Ranger to give things an additional +1/+0. I really think this is probably bottom of A. In a fairy deck, you probably could play this with a straight face, but boy, is this pretty awful. But bottom of A we go. Next up, we have Ugin Defends the Temple. Now, the backside of this particular card is a flyer called A Remnant of the Rising Star, which I will read in just a moment. But first, the saga itself is 3 minutes, says create a 1/1 mana dork. Chapter 2, put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. And then Chapter 3, you get the Flyer, which is a Dragon Spirit 2/2 with flying. Whenever another creature ETBs under your control, you may pay X. When you do, put X 1/1 counters on that creature. And as long as you control 5 or more modified creatures, it gets +5/+5 and has trample. So a contender for a +1/+1 counter deck. So let's think about this. At its base case, it's a 3 mana 1/1 mana dork, which is not good. We're paying a premium of 2 mana on that. But Chapter 2, we do get the counters. So with various amplification effects like hardened scales and so forth, that's not awful. It's not good. It's not awful either. And then with our flip, we get what is essentially an option to add counters to pay by paying mana, and then a possible 7/7 flyer with trample if somehow we jump through all of the hoops of having 5 or more modified creatures. So this one, I think you could maybe play with a straight face in a Saga deck. I don't know if there's necessarily a dedicated mono green Saga deck. I think there's a Bant Saga Commander. I will have that on screen. I don't remember it off the top of my head. But if you cared about maybe the enchantment type, the 1/1 counter synergy. I think you could maybe play this with a straight face. I mean, is it in cuttable tier? I feel like this is above the other contenders in the C tier because this actually is a card that makes mana at very minimum and can play into other synergies, and then you have a possibility of a 7/7 flying trample on the backside. So honestly, I think this might go above the Faerie that we just talked about, and maybe even above the Xantid Swarm. I think this goes below Caustic Wasps, honestly. I could see playing this in a +1/+1 counter deck or something like that if you are on a super tight budget, or you might care about the enchantment type. So that is Remnant of the Rising Star. Next on our list, we have Unyaro Bees, which is a 3-mana 0/1 creature insect, but it is 3 green pips, I may add, so you need to really be in mono green to play this on curve. It has flying. You can pay 1 to give it +1/+1 until end of turn, basically fire breathing, and we can pay 4 and sack it to deal 2 damage to target creature or player. This would be awful even in modern 2024 limited. Even in a limited environment, this would still be pretty awful. The only redeeming quality I think is really the fire breathing, because we're not going to be wanting to pay 4, so a total of 7 mana to deal 2 damage to something. So is it good that this can have fire breathing? So for 4, well, the problem is here, by the time you sink the 3 mana into it, we need to untap and wait a whole nother turn, and we just have better things to do with our mana than to temporarily give something +1/+1. So I think this is definitely going to be in the C category, but for an insect tribal deck, would it care about this enough to run it? I still don't think so. I just think there are better things you could be doing with your mana. So maybe this just goes, I think, right below our destroy target artifact creature option here, but above Scryb Ranger. So I think we'll go top of C for Unyaro Bees. Next we have Yavimaya Gnats, 3/1/0/1 flying, and we can pay 1 to regenerate it. So I suppose we can block 1 creature, regenerate it, and then what do you do after that? I just don't even know. 3 mana for a 0/1. It can't even deal any combat damage, so it doesn't even trigger a Toski card draw. I think this goes into our poop tier for sure. I just don't see any redeeming qualities. There's not even regenerate synergies, and regenerate in 2024 is pretty scuffed with all the exile and -1/-1 and all of those types of effects, and I just don't see it being playable in any fashion. Next, we have another contender for the poop tier. This is Flailing Drake, 4 mana 2/3 flyer. It has flying. If Flailing Drake blocks or is blocked by any creature, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Not Flailing Drake, that creature. So basically, it makes this effectively a 4 mana 1/2 if you just always assume that that trigger will happen. This is absolutely awful, and bottom of poop tier it goes because it is actively working against us. And up next we have Hawkeater Moth, 4 mana 1/2 insect creature with flying. It cannot be the target of spells or abilities. I think this is right into C tier as well. The art looks kind of cool, although I don't like how the blending between the eagle's wing and the moth's wing happens. It just feels like they're designed separately within Photoshop and then just sort of pasted on top of each other. But Hawkeater Moth I think would have to go in our C tier, of course, but it would be below our 2 mana 1/2 flyers, because we would play a 2 mana 1/2 flyer over a 4 mana 1/2 flyer with Shroud. So I think we go into below or towards the bottom of C tier. And coming up next, we have Mindbender Spores, 3 mana 0/1 wall with flying. When it blocks any creature, put 4 fungus counters on that creature. During its controller's untap phase, remove a fungus counter from that creature. As long as the creature has any fungus counters on it, it does not untap during its controller's untap phase. Now, this is effectively a wall, but it only will block a creature once because any 1/1 will kill this thing. So it's really really more of a one-shot 3 mana get the effect of the fungus counters onto one creature, because there's just no way you're going to be blocking with this thing twice. So it can't even attack. I don't know. I think this goes below a 2 mana 1/2 flyer. I'd rather play that. So definitely into C it goes. Then we have Killer Bees, 0/1 creature insect. What a badass art. I absolutely love the design for the shield, as if like a bee would be able to hammer out or like smith hard iron to form a shield. I absolutely love this. And I always wonder, like, bees would always run spears as weapons because they're born with one, but they don't want to have to use their stinger because it would result in death. So it always makes sense in movies and media that they would be wielding spears, although I think it's funny that the largest one within the art has the like hand guard. And by the way, how is it even gripping the hand guard if its left leg only has the like little pincer claw thing sticking out? It's like a giant nail. I don't even know how it's able to hold a sword and have a handle, but anyway, this is awesome art. This is a 3 mana 0/1 insect with flying, and we can pay 1 to give it +1/+1 until end of turn. So I think this goes below our Unyaro Bees because I think that has just a little bit more utility, but this is 1 green pip cheaper. We can pay 1 generic mana instead of having the 3 green pips, but I don't really think that matters if you're playing bees. So we'll put it in top of C tier. And we have our first Efreet on the list up next with Ifh-Biff Efreet. I believe that's how that's pronounced. 4 mana 3/3 flyer. We could pay 1. It will deal 1 damage to each creature with flying and each player, and any player may play this ability. Now, this has real utility in Commander because this is a board wipe where you say, all right, here's my 4 mana board wipe. Opponent B, waste all your resources to wipe the board. Although it will only affect flyers, so you'd have to have an opponent care about the fact that flyers are on board, so very niche use case there. But if you are in like a burn deck, I'm just trying to think if this would beat out even like a Pyrohemia. The Pyrohemia would hit all creatures, but it is nice that this does hit any player. So maybe if you care about just dealing non-combat damage in any way, shape, or form, or wiping flyers off the board, this could be a card for you. Or if you care about the Efreet creature type, I guess. I don't even know if that's a thing in mono green. But I think that this has real utility, and I think this would maybe go towards the bottom of A. Also because your opponents can activate this and have it backfire on you, because it would basically allow them to pay 3 to then just kill this creature. So huge downside there. I wonder how that would work though, because if they had, let's say, infinite green mana, they would just be able to stack up all the activations and then just kill everybody in one go. So maybe if anything, this would maybe be like a infinite mana outlet to win the game if you have the highest life total among players. So maybe we move it up 1 just because there's some janky shenanigans you can do there. So we'll move it up above our Faerie boy right at the bottom of A. Moving on here, we have Kyscu Drake, 4 mana 2/2 flyer. Pay 1, give it +0/+1 until end of turn. You cannot spend more than green in this way each turn. So I believe that means you can only activate it once. Sacrifice Kyscu Drake and Spitting Drake. Search your library for a Venomous Dragon and put it into play. Shuffle your library afterwards. I don't even know what these are. This is absolute hot garbage. I think we'll just go into probably our C category, maybe behind our Flying Haster and right in the middle of C-ish. I think that looks good. Next we have Locust Swarm, 4 mana 1/1 flying. You can pay 1 to regenerate it or pay 1 to untap it. Use this ability only once each turn. I think this is a great contender for, once again, middle of C. Moving on, we have Lurking Green Dragon, 4 mana 4/4 flyer. Now these are some stats we enjoy. Lurking Green Dragon can't attack unless defending player controls a creature with flying. So, of course, they had to pin a giant hoop to jump through to be able to attack with a 4/4 flyer in green, but this does trigger your ferocious synergies, so I think you actually could maybe play this with a straight face if you care about the dragon creature type as well, and you're in colors that have very limited options for dragons, maybe like a blue-green Simic dragon deck. I think you could maybe play this with a straight face in those decks. Maybe we'll put it towards bottom of A. I just don't think that you'll ever be able to attack with it reliably, but you can sacrifice it to draw cards equal to its power with Life's Legacy or something like that, or if you care about the power in any way, shape, or form, or the dragon creature type, which is more likely. So I think we'll put it in bottom of A. And up next we have Pixie Queen, 4 mana, 1/1. It is a Pixie Queen, flying, and we can pay 3 and tap it. Target creature gains flying until end of turn. So a total of 7 mana to give one thing flying. I think this goes probably bottom of C, right? I mean, the question is would we rather play a 1/1 flyer for 1 over this? And I think you honestly would, to trigger like green cast triggers, etc. So I think this would go bottom of C as well. All right, and then we have Venomous Dragonfly, 4 mana, 1/1 insect with flying. Whenever it blocks or becomes blocked by a creature, destroy that creature at end of combat. So a nice little blocker here. The problem with this is that, once again, it has only 1 toughness, so you're only going to get 1 use out of it. So if you look at this instead as just a 4 mana, 1/1 death touch that can't even attack, I think that this is still awful because it doesn't even have death touch, which would trigger like the Infect Commander. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'll have it on screen as well. It wouldn't even trigger him to be able to deal Infect damage. So I think this is pretty awful. It's clearly in C. I think it's towards maybe the bottom of C. At this point, it doesn't really matter too much. I think we'll maybe put it above the generic flyers here, probably in the middle. I'm thinking a 2/1 flyer with haste has more utility than this, although, well, you probably want a blocker more so in Commander. We'll put it right above the haster there. Then we have Cockatrice, which is a flying Cockatrice 2/4. Whenever Cockatrice blocks or becomes blocked by a non-wall creature, destroy that creature at end of combat. So for 1 more mana, we can get the same placement here in C tier. And then we have Giant Dust Wasp, 5 mana, 3/3 flyer with suspend 4, so we can pay 2. Then we can wait literally 3/4 of the commander game before removing the last suspend counter from it to play it, and it has haste, so we can attack with a 3/3, a hasty 3/3 on turn 6. My goodness, not even an insect deck wants this, but it does have some utility. I mean, it has not even respectable stats, but they're not awful, right? They're okay. 3/3s, kind of okay. So I think this will probably still go below our hasty flyer. Would I rather play a 1/1 flyer than this? I honestly would. I'm definitely not going to wait 4 turns to get a +2/+2 to my 1/1 flyer. So I think this will go probably towards the bottom of C, and it will probably be right around there. And next up, we got a spicy one. This is Kura the Boundless Sky, 5 mana, 4/4 Dragon Spirit with flying and death touch. Now that is a 2024 commander stat line. When it dies, choose 1, search your library for up to 3 land cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle, or create an XX green spirit creature token where X is the number of lands you control. And I absolutely love the fact that you can grab any 3 lands off of this, so you can grab your Dark Depths combo, or you can grab your Field of the Dead and Vesuva Thespian Stage to copy the Field of the Dead. Obviously, you want a way to sack this at instant speed to immediately get the death trigger, and I think 99% of the time you're probably just going to use it for the land grabbing effect. But I think that this is also just a giant rattlesnake for your opponents. Not only does it have the death touch mechanic, but your opponent does not want you to search up all 3 of those lands. Also, it could, you could search up like a Glacial Chasm, which would be absolutely disgusting. But But I think in any sort of Aristocrats deck, if you're in Golgari and you're looking for something to sack, this is right at the top of your list. So this definitely goes into the bottom of S category, but not quite above Birds of Paradise, because Birds of Paradise is simply the greatest in any green deck. Next we have Canopy Dragon, 6 mana 4/4 with Trample. We can pay 2 and it gains flying and loses Trample until end of turn. So the fella just needs a little boost, you know, feed him some mana, he'll get some energy and he'll go out and dance for you out on the battlefield there. I mean, look at him. He just wants to climb on those little twigs and climb in the forest. He just needs a little motivating. That's all. But this is a 6 mana 4/4 where we can pay 2. I mean, most of the time, you're probably not even going to give this flying. So if you even look at it as a 6 mana generic 4/4 with Trample, that's even awful, because we have baseline Colossal Dreadmaw, which would be a 6 mana 6/6 Trample. But if you care about the dragon creature type, I mean, kudos to you, I guess. It still doesn't make it redeemable. I think this goes into the C category. We'll put it right below our Skin Shifter, just because I think you could use a little bit of company. Moving on, we have Destructor Dragon, 6 mana 4/4 flying. When it dies, destroy target non-creature permanent. I think this is definitely playable. You could definitely play this in a normal commander deck. You'd probably be caring about the dragon creature type in order to play this, but this is a good insurance policy. You can also negotiate with your opponents to say, hey, if you swing your 7/7, I will block with my 4/4, and then we can get rid of that problematic permanent that will actually win the game. So there's a little bit of politicking that can happen here. It's very versatile in terms of destroying non-creature permanents, so it can hit artifacts, enchantments, battles, and planeswalkers, which is pretty nice. And once again, I think you're probably going to be playing this more in an Aristocrats deck that probably cares about the dragon creature type. I think you could definitely play this with a straight face. I'll put it below Caustic Wasps, because that's much more cheaper and is repeatable, and above our Saga. But I think that it's probably playable in some decks out there that are low power. Moving on here, we have Green Dragon, 6 mana 4/4 flyer. When it enters battlefield until end of turn, whenever a creature an opponent controls is dealt damage, destroy it, which would be great synergy with the Efreet card that we talked about just a little bit ago. I think that this definitely has some use if you're in some sort of a enrage deck. If you're playing like dinosaurs, you might already be dealing damage to all creatures on board. You probably are in red if you're playing this, because red has the most amount of those, Pyrohemia and so forth. And so I think that this could possibly wipe out a lot of creatures. Also, the art is pretty badass. So I think you could definitely play this with a straight face, so that makes it into the A category. The question is, how far up do we put it within A? I think it has to go above our Saga. Well, maybe below our Saga, because this will have to be in a very specific deck, but I definitely think it's better than our 1/1 Xantid Swarm that turns off spells for the defending players, and I think this has a little bit more utility and a lot more ability to swing the board state in your favor, so I think it goes in the middle of A. Next, we have Herdchaser Dragon, 6 mana 3/3 flying trample. It has Megamorph, which for some reason you would pay 3 mana, put it face down as a 2/2, and then for 7 mana, we can make this a 4/4. When it's turned face up, put a 1/1 counter on each other dragon you control. Okay, that's pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie. It's not good, of course, but compared to the other absolute garbage we've been reviewing today, this is definitely playable. I think this might go below our Destructor Dragon, probably above our Green Dragon. No, it's definitely got to go below the Green Dragon, I think. I would definitely play this over our 1/1 Xantid Swarm, again, because I think this does have the ability to synergize with your dragons. The stat line is okay. I just think that if anything, you would want this face down through some other mechanic, not by morphing it yourself. Maybe like a Kadena deck or something like that would maybe want this if you're running more dragons. Is that even a thing? I think we'll just put it in the middle of A and move on. All right, next we have Ugin the Rising Star, 6-mana 5/5 flyer. It's a dragon spirit. When it dies, you may distribute 5 1/1 counters among any number of target creatures. So that's okay in a pulse and pulse counter deck. If you care about dragons, 1/1 counters with dragons, we've seen some synergy there. I think that the stat line is good. A 5/5 flyer for 6 mana is about what you would expect outside of, well, within a color that doesn't usually do flyers very well. And you obviously want a way to sack this at instant speed, but it is a nice rattlesnake. So, I mean, it's definitely within either A. Would you even make it into S? Is this better than a Gilded Goose as a flyer? I just think +5/+5 is pretty garbage, but if you do have like hardened skill synergies, then that becomes an extra 10 power on your board. We'll put this at the bottom of S. I think this could probably go into a deck that cares about pulse encounters and or death triggers. Did you hear that? I think that might be an Ancient Bronze Dragon, 7 mana 7/7 Elder Dragon with flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. When you do, put X 1/1 counters on each of up to 2 target creatures where X is the result. With a d20, of course, the average die roll is going to be a 10.5, which we'll round down to be conservative to a 10. So putting 10 power on board each turn, but it does have to deal combat damage, which means you have to untap with it. This is a pretty sweet dragon. And within the Ancient Dragon cycle, this guy is probably not the best. In fact, he might even be the worst, but don't tell him I said that. I just think that this is a super cool dragon where if you are locked into green and you're looking for flyers, this is going to be one of the best cards in your deck. Would it make the cut for a 1/1 counter deck? Perhaps if you're running a bunch of haste enablers, but I think this is pretty expensive if you're not cheating it out. But nonetheless, we must put it in our S category right above our death trigger that gives less 1/1 counters. Ancient Bronze Dragon is definitely much more repeatable and reliable for that, but it goes below the Boundless Sky because that just delivers a ton of value. All right, with a tough act to follow, we have Bounteous Kirin, 7 mana 4/4 Kirin Spirit. With flying, whenever you play a spirit or arcane spell, you may gain life equal to that spell's converted mana cost. Okay, some life gain in a spirit or arcane deck, and it is spirit itself, so points there. I think we can maybe put this into A. We're going to put it below the Caustic Wasps, and maybe we'll just put it below our Saga as well. This definitely is going to be in a very specific deck. You know, I think it would go below our Green Dragon as well. I just think it's not quite good enough there, but, you know, as a payoff in a spirit deck, I think this has got to go below that. I think we have to go above the Xantid Swarm, but in a spirit deck, I mean, this might be playable, so it goes into A, but in the middle of A. Moving on, we have Foe-Razer Regent, 7 mana 4/5 flyer. When it ETBs, you may have it fight target creature you don't control, so a nice fight effect on a body there. Whenever a creature you control fights, put 2 1/1 counters on it at the beginning of the next end step. So assuming that it will survive the fight effect, this is a 6/7 flying a trample for 7 mana with a removal spell attached to it. I think that's pretty decent. Compared to what we've been looking at, that's an excellent card. And I think that you could probably play that in a super budget deck, especially if you care about the dragon creature type. Bonus points for the art. The art looks absolutely sick. I don't think it quite makes it into the the S tier, but I think it will be probably at the top of A. Now, I'm going to put it below Caustic Wasp because, once again, I think that Caustic Wasps is probably the best utility that we have in the A category so far. And you know what I'm going to do? I think I might move Gilded Goose down. We're actually going to put Caustic Wasp at the top there. We'll move Gilded Goose down to position number 2. But that's going to be Foe-Razer Regent, just a nice removal spell on a stick. Next, we have Hornet Queen, the all-star of 2014 commander, back when I started, even this was getting a little bit scuffed. 7 mana, 2/2 flying death touch. It's an insect. When it enters, create 4 1/1 green insect creature tokens with flying and death touch. So just a super intimidating wall against flyer decks. You definitely want to be bouncing this and doing a bunch of token type of creation shenanigans in order to get the most amount of value out of Hornet Queen. And you also want to be able to cheat this in play because 7 mana for what is essentially 6 power and toughness in the air is not great. Granted, it all has death touch, and they're split up amongst multiple creatures, but at 7 mana, it's still pretty scuffed. But I think that this is still deserves some nostalgia points as well, just because this was ran, and it still is put in like precons nowadays. I'm not really sure why, but this is just, it doesn't win you the game per se, but it does create a lot of great defenders. So I think we go top of A, maybe below Gilded Goose and Foe-Razer Regent. I think we still probably go below the Saga because I still like to make mana, like a 3 mana make a 1/1 dork is not the worst. And I think we honestly put it maybe right above the Spirit Gain Life fella there. So I think that's probably where Hornet Queen will go, right in the middle of A. And here we have the one, the only, the GOAT dragon in green. This is Old Gnawbone, 7 mana, 7/7 dragon with flying. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. Absolutely top of S this goes, even better than Birds of Paradise, and the reason why is because Birds of Paradise will not win you the game. It is a nice setup piece. It's one of the best setup pieces, if not the best setup piece to have on turn 1, but Old Gnawbone is what will win you games. Not only is it a 7/7 flyer, but it gives you the mana to absolutely pop off and essentially win the game the turn that it is played, because you do not need to attack with Old Gnawbone. It just says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player. So you can send all of your unblockables in, or your trample boys, and then they will deal a bunch of damage and make you the game-winning mana that turn. So just a great dragon here with Old Gnawbone, absolutely top of S. And next we have Earthquake Dragon. This is a 15 mana, 10/10 elemental dragon. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total mana value of dragons you control. It has flying and trample, and we can pay 3 and sack a land to return it from your graveyard to your hand. Now this is an interesting pick. Obviously you have to be in a dedicated dragons deck, and the question I would ask myself is, does this make it into a 2024 Commander meta Dragon deck? And personally, I think it's a little bit too slow to actually make it into real Dragon decks. The base case, I think, is if you play like a 3-drop, then a 4-drop, then a 5-drop dragon all on curve. That puts you at 12 mana. So now the turn after that, on turn 6, when you have 6 mana, you could pay 3 for a flying trample 10/10, which is pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I'm a Timmy player at heart, right? The stats are really cool, and the art is absolutely fantastic. This is like Attack on Titan vibes right here with Earthquake Dragon. Also, just the fact that it is an earthquake but flying somehow is absolutely sick. I think though, in terms of a power level, I'd still rather play a Caustic Wasps over this in like an Dragon deck than maybe this. As bad as that sounds, I just really value the ability to destroy artifacts, so I don't think it makes it into S. I think it's below A. Granted, it is good in dragon decks. I think we have to put this above Gilded Goose, but below Caustic Wasp, just because, like I said, removal is such a premium on creatures nowadays that I absolutely love that effect stapled on creatures. But right behind that, I think, is where we can put this, because it is just a giant 10/10 flying with trample, and Magical Christmas Land, you can be able to cast this on turn 6. And then basically win the game after that if you can give it double strike or something like that. And it does have a little bit of recurability, but I don't think you'd ever pay 3 and sack a land to return it to your hand unless you were in absolute desperation mode. But I still think there's better things to be doing with your mana than that. Or if you care about playing lands from the graveyard somehow, not really sure. But Earthquake Dragon, top of A, we can put it. Now, that would have been our final card, but we do have one more to review here. This is Emerald Dragon. For some reason, Tier List Maker would not pick up this card no matter how many times I tried to upload the image. So we're just going to roll with it, and I will edit it into the video and then into the final screenshotted list. This is Emerald Dragon, 6 mana 4/4 flying trample. For 3 mana, it has an instant adventure, counter target activated or triggered ability from a non-creature source, which is pretty great because a lot of enchantments, a lot of planeswalkers, a lot of artifacts have triggered abilities or activated abilities that we want to be stopping. So I think you could maybe play this with a straight face. I mean, I think it definitely is an A. You could play this with a straight face, mostly for the adventure side. I think a 6 mana 4/4 flying trample is pretty scuffed in 2024 Commander, but this is one of the unique effects in green that allows you to counter activated or triggered abilities. So there is some value there. I'm not going to lie that just because of the scarcity of that effect in green, I do really like it. So I think it goes into the A category. I think we'll just tack it on to the end of A just to have it easy within the screenshot. But this probably, if I could actually place it within the A tier, I think we'd probably put it right below our Saga and then right above Green Dragon, just because I think that you will always find an opportunity to use that 3 mana instant for what is essentially quote-unquote removal, more just a temporary shutdown of what your opponents are trying to do. So right between our Ugin and the Green Dragon. So that concludes our list of mono green flyers, and let's just go through the list one more time to make sure that we don't want to make any tweaks. All right, so at the top of the top, we have Old Gnawbone, Birds of Paradise, the Boundless Sky, Ancient Bronze Dragon, and then our Death Tree that puts 1 counters on things. I think that honestly, I think that's fine. I do like the order of that. I think that all makes sense. Within our A category, I think we still lead with top with Caustic Wasps as the best source of removal. Then we've got our Chonky Boy, followed by Gilded Goose, Foe-Razer Regent. I think that this makes sense. Gilded Goose, I mean, it will always make you mana, but only 1 turn of mana, so that's why it's a little bit scuffed and not higher on the list. And I think Foe-Razer Regent is a nice removal spell on a stick. The rest of these can sort of blend together, but I think that really the power drop-off starts when we get to Hornet Queen and then our Gain Life Spirit card. And then here, I probably never play anything below like Hornet Queen within this particular list. And then all of our C category, I think, is fine. All of it sort of blends together as just cuttable chaff. And then our poop tier is going to be a 3 mana 1/1 a flyer, and then our 2/3 flyer that gets basically debuffed down to a 1/2 for 4 mana. So definitely in poop tier. You know, honestly, what should happen at the end right now is I should move all of these down to poop tier. But honestly, I think that, you know, poop tier is really reserved for the cards that are actively working against you and are just straight up insulting to even like offer as a rate or offer as a card to play in Magic the Gathering. So I think that's where we will conclude this list. So hopefully you all jank brewers out there got some great ideas for your mono green flyers lists. My name is Nathan. You've been watching Salty Productions. Once again, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like on it and subscribe to see more. And if you want to check out more jank tier lists that I have made, I have a mono blue landfall tier list in addition to a mono red card draw tier list. Now the mono red is not as janky. That's actually looking at all of the playable card advantage spells within mono red, which I actually think we do evaluate the meta options. It's not just as scuffed as this particular list. This list is absolutely awful. I mean, there's really only 4 to 5 cards that you would even see in a meta 2024 Commander deck in 2024, but a lot of those red options, really all of them are good. It's just sort of sorting them into the best from the good cards. So anyway, that's the video, guys. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully we'll see you all in the next one.